Well, okay, guys, welcome back to Conspirinormal. We're gone for a couple of weeks, but we are back, and we've got our good friend Nathan Isaac with us, and we are just going to see where this conversation goes. Nathan, I think this is actually the first time that we've had you on by yourself. I don't think we've ever had you on without Kyle or Darian.
No
Oh,
penny
really?
roll crew.
I don't think.
Oh, I didn't know that, man. I thought maybe we had done one. But I guess because of Strange Realities.
We did like the Strange Realities previews. We had done those, but usually that was with other people as well.
Yeah.
So
Oh, shit,
I
man.
think this is
fun.
the first time you're solo on this show. So
My virgin
so
soul.
welcome.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, yeah. If you would indulge me though, I wanted to talk about what I got to do last week, in which we were kind of talking about here right before we started. But I am pertinent to a show that Surfiel and I did. God, when did we do that? Like 4 years ago now, or almost 4 years ago?
Long
At
time ago. I
least 3 years
remember
ago.
Nathan caught the my presentation on the same thing too.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
did. It was fantastic also. Like it's very, very cool. Like I have so many questions for you, man, after you tell us about this, because
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm super intrigued by it.
Well, so I got to go to Mardi Gras, which was awesome. But I also, as part of that, got to be in one of the parades. And I will tell you how that this transpired, how I got to do this. I got to join a crew, which the crew that I joined, Krewe, which the crew that I joined is the crew of Thoth. So the like ancient Egyptian god of wisdom, equivalent to Hermes. And how this happened was that I have a former manager of mine, a good friend of mine named Joe, and about a year or so ago, he asked me about we had always talked about going to New Orleans, going to Mardi Gras. He grew up down there, and it's something that he periodically still does with his family, which is go there. So he's pretty much an expert on Mardi Gras and everything, where to go, what's the best place to see it, what's the best place to do, all these type of things, what crew is going to be, running when. And he asked me to join this crew because him and his son were going to do it, and he said he really wanted somebody, who's a good friend to go with him. And so at the time, I was pretty busy with planning the conference, but you got to pay your dues, so I paid the dues to get into the crew and all that, and wasn't able to attend like any of the meetings or anything. Um, so we get there. We got there on Friday. We actually weren't there the day of Mardi Gras. But the thing is about Mardi Gras in New Orleans, there are parades that start. I think the first one started this year on January 14th. So this is like a pretty much like it's almost like a 2 month thing. And in the week leading up to Mardi Gras is when you have the most of the parades, especially in New Orleans. There's just several parades. There's like kind of a misconception that I had about Mardi Gras was that I always thought that Mardi Gras was something that took place in the French Quarter. It does not. The parades is what I mean. The parades do not happen in the French Quarter because the streets are way too narrow for some of these massive ass floats. So, but we did when we went to the French Quarter, we did get to see a walking parade, and it was like this crew with these guys with chef's hats passing out wooden spoons to people, and they were playing jazz, and it was like a really cool thing to see. Um, so that Friday night we got there, there were two parades. There was the crew of Hermes, and I can't remember. Yeah, the other one's the Crew d'Etat. So it was like the crew of Hermes, and each one has its like own theme. And the Hermes one was very kind of classically based. And the floats are just these things are just like, I mean, they're just like works of art within themselves. Okay. Each one is like really elaborately designed and really cool. And then and the second one that night, that crew was kind of more they were the political satire crew. So you would have like these floats that had like Trump on it or like Biden or like, these different, officials or like even some inside jokes of like New Orleans or Louisiana politics. You had a lot of those. And I actually got a little they hand these things out, these little like it was almost like a little playbill that showed you what each one was. That was the only crew that I saw that did that. But it was really neat. I mean, just like, these were the nighttime parades, and that's mostly what we saw. Um, you've got these guys that, they carry these big, these like they're like torch bearers
Hmm.
basically. And this is like a tradition. It's a holdover from when there was no electricity. And these guys would carry these big torches, and that's basically they're the ones that to start the parade. And of course you've got the floats, and you've got all these different like high school and college bands and color guards that are a part of this. So like these are big massive things. Okay. So we watched that. The Saturday night we went over to the French Quarter, did all that stuff. Bourbon Street is probably one of the craziest places I've ever seen in my life. Um, I got a just saw a drag queen singing Crazy Train on the side of the road, side of the street. Just interest. Jesus was there.
Yeah, of course. He's
There were
always there.
like there were all these like Christian protesters, and as we're getting into like Jackson Square, we're walking down from this Riverwalk area that goes along the Mississippi River, and just like the most bizarre like juxtaposition of my life. You've got these there were these Christian protesters, and they were protesting Mardi Gras essentially. So nobody, Lord forbid anybody have fun. And like things like God hates homos and these type of things, or homosex is sin is one of them that it said. And they got their loudspeakers, and they're blaring their message. Well, down below the steps there's this guy, this old black guy, and he's just down there just singing like Al Green or something, just ignoring whatever is going on around him. And it was just this strange juxtaposition of just like welcome to New Orleans. It's just the craziest place on earth. So we got to see the crew of Endymion that night on that Saturday evening. Their theme was all about silent films, which was cool. I was sorry that I did not get to see the Metropolis one, which was extravagant,
Cool.
which I later saw on TV. The reason we did not wait is that we had to be up early to go do our thing in the morning.
Right.
And but what was funny was that the floats were coming in, and these things are massive, right? Some of them were like triple deckers, okay? And the the floats coming in, and like, over there the traffic lights are kind of oriented differently. They're to the side, not up and down, right? Because of the hurricanes, I'm assuming. And two of the floats managed to knock down a traffic light.
Hell yeah.
So this traffic light is just like hanging and dangling. And Joe was finally just like, okay, that's probably going to be a while, and we got to be up early. We got a long day tomorrow, so let's go. So we went back to the hotel. So on Sunday morning, and I start seeing like people with shirts that say Thoth Sunday. So people are like very supportive of their like of the parade that they like. Okay. And apparently, like, the Saturday night in Endymion, that's when people like really, you know, really wait for. And Thoth is another one. So we were a day parade. Um, you get started, you go downstairs. There's like 2,500 guys down in this big hotel ballroom. We stayed in the same hotel that we were starting out from. And basically you are just like there you go to where you're sitting with your float with your lieutenant, who's basically the guy that is on the float with you, that's in charge of you. You go sit down, you have breakfast. There's no real interaction with anybody else because you're in this huge ballroom. Um, so I didn't get to any secrets of the crew or anything like that. But So we get on this thing. We get to the float. We get on it. We're waiting and waiting. You've got you've got a bucket to piss in, right? You know,
I always wondered about that. Yeah.
it's all dudes on this thing. So they've got a bucket over there. We
Everyone shares a
fortunately
bucket.
fortunately we were right next to the bucket. And of course they're just giving you beer the
Yeah.
whole entire time, right?
Yeah.
And on the way there, we're on this bus and this guy comes up to me and Joe are sitting in the very back. And this guy comes up to us and he's like, guys, I really got to take a leak. Like it's serious. I'm gonna use this beer can. So this guy is like peeing in this beer can right next to us. And you've got to go around the city, right, to go to your staging area. So we're through like in this like industrial area and there's like a bunch of train tracks. And so we're going over these things and this dude is just sitting there just trying to piss into a beer can. It's just like I'm like this experience is great already, you know. And you get on this thing and Joe had told me, you know, it's like we're gonna be on this thing for 6 hours. And honestly, as soon as we got going, it felt like I was on it for like 30 minutes.
Damn.
It's just that quick, and just the energy is from the crowd is just so massive you don't even notice. And of course, you know, I was drinking, I had some vodka, I had some beer, but I was like sweating so much because you're in this costume and you're also in a mask. So you're just sweating so much that you don't, you know, yeah, I really wasn't getting that drunk. And so we're driving by, and one of the things that Thoth does, they have a little bit of a longer parade route because what they do is they go by some of these hospitals. They like kind of because some of these crews are also charitable organizations. So you go by these hospitals where people maybe can't get outside or they're shut in or whatever. And so they can see the parade go by. So and then you hit like these kind of like residential areas and people are outside having like these block parties in these residential areas. And like it's starting to get wild. And I'm like, and I'm even telling Joe, I'm like, this is wild. This is crazy. And he's like, wait till we get to St. Charles. So St. Charles Avenue, that is the main thoroughfare of these parades. And as soon as you hit that, all hell breaks loose. You're throwing beads left and right. Well, we had like a whole stack. By the end, you're done. Like you have nothing left. And we're throwing t-shirts and beads and all kinds of trinkets and all kinds of stuff outside. And finally probably about 6:30 we were done. And you know, that night we just kind of just called it a night because that was a big day. The next day I got to see on Monday night we hung around for a while. You're in this circle, like this main circle that's called Lee Circle. And or used to be called Lee Circle because
Yeah.
there's a statue of the
What
of the
Lee
general.
might that be, Adam?
Yeah, yeah. That was a sore spot for some people there, but
Because the statue's gone now, right?
because the statue is gone, you've just a
Just like a
pedestal with a
column.
blank with nothing on it. It's a column with nothing on it. So you're in this thing and got to see the crew of Proteus, which is the not the oldest crew in existence, but it is the oldest crew still running. So it's from like the 1880s. I think can't remember you might refresh me on this or if you know the original crew.
Thomas.
Yeah, they're still around, but they only do like a special ball during the time of Mardi
Was
Gras. So they
was
don't
that
actually.
one and those older ones a bit more of a high class affair, did it seem? Or do you know?
Um, yeah, a little bit. Like their theme for that was like Italian satirical comedy from the Renaissance,
And I
which
mean
was
the membership
interesting.
though, in particular.
Yeah, well, it's hard. I mean,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell. So that's one of the oldest crew, and then after that was the crew of Orpheus, which is one of the newer crews, and that actually is Harry Connick Jr.'s crew, and I actually got to see him on the float. And it's actually he was founded by Harry Connick Jr. and his father, Harry Connick Sr., which incidentally was the one that defeated Garrison for DA and was DA of New Orleans for 30 years after that. Which, by the way, Nathan, I did get to go to Jim Garrison's grave. on that Saturday too.
Did you, man? Was that kind of
Yeah.
wild? Was it spooky?
Yeah, it was kind of nondescript really. And it was kind of like he's just there kind of buried alone. And I did the whole find a grave thing and managed to find him. It took me a little bit to find him, but once I did, it was there.
What's it?
So
What's it look like? Is it anything? Is it just a headstone?
yeah, it's kind of just a big headstone. Um, but it's in Metairie, which is this kind of more unincorporated, rich suburb of New Orleans, not very far. And but there's a lot of like real movers. It's like one of those cemeteries, kind of like Mount Olivet here, Surfield, where it's like movers and shakers of New Orleans are in there. Like the guy who, you know, uh, owned the Saints is buried there. Okay, and there's like also this like Confederate monument that's next to him. So they're really ornate graves.
Hmm.
But Garrison's is it's kind of a smaller grave. Um, he's kind of buried alone, which I was kind of like, man, it was kind of sad, really. But it had on its it was like, let justice be done or the heavens fall, which was what I guess he said and what was used in the movie.
But it was like walking around the Kaaba for a conspiracy theorist, I bet, Adam.
Well, like, well, I wonder, like, was anybody, did anyone leave any coins or anything? Or was there anything like left on the grave? Like people, fans?
I think there might have been some flowers.
Ah, okay.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, I got a picture of it. I'll send it over to you.
Yeah.
But
I want to see.
it was yeah, it was an interesting trip. I had never been to New Orleans. And for the first time in New Orleans, my first Mardi Gras, and I got to be a part of Mardi Gras. So yeah, it was a real blast. Um, Definitely something that because I would advise going back. To anybody. It is an event. And like I mean just seeing the floats alone. I mean these things are so big and just so ornate. Each and every single one of them is like a work of art in and of itself.
So each crew has a parade basically, right? So there's like how
Yes.
many floats did were in the crew that you were in and the thought?
I think our crew was about 30.
Okay. So
And they kind of vary between in size. Some of them were like 30, some of them were as little as 15. It just depends on, the size and I guess the budget of the crew or what they want what they want to do.
do they also like does each crew reach out and find like marching bands and others to mix in with their parade?
Yeah, I'm not sure how exactly that works. I think that it's probably it's probably it might be that it might be kind of a charitable thing for some of the bands. Um yeah, I'm not quite sure exactly how the crews do that, how they get the bands or whether it's like something that they have to sign up for or it's something that they seek these different high school or college bands out. I'm not exactly sure how it really works.
So like if you live in New Orleans from like January through Mardi Gras, like you can hear parades all over the city all the time, right?
Yeah,
Somewhere
yeah,
somewhere in the city a
yeah,
parade is happening
yeah,
basically, right?
yeah. Something is happening, and there was that walking parade that I said we saw in the French Quarter. That one was that just like it was like guys on a wagon, and you had like the king on a horse or whatever, you know.
It's just
Um,
like after you guys did all the research about the like I didn't know anything. I've never been to New Orleans. I've never seen Mardi Gras live or anything, but so I'm very jealous of your trip. That sounds amazing. But like,
we should all go next year.
yeah, dude, that would be amazing. I'm in. So, uh, But the research that you guys did, which was fantastic about the mystical cruise. Like I didn't know any of that fucking shit, man. Like
Yeah.
Me
because
neither.
it puts the
Me
whole
neither.
thing in a totally different viewpoint, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It means something that I did absolutely had no idea it meant. And now, like you describing it, I'm thinking of it in a totally different sort of vibe than what I would have if you're like, oh, I saw the parades at Mardi Gras, right? Now it's something, even more magical,
Well,
right?
Adam, and you said that there was a lot of kind of those classical, mythological, and occult even themes going on in in the floats,
Yeah.
right? There's like a
Oh yeah.
giant Baphomet.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. The crew of Orpheus, which for some obvious reasons, because of Harry Connick Jr. mostly, is oriented towards music. And if you look at their symbol is actually a harp, like a lyre. So Orpheus is a figure from Greek mythology that, is associated with music.
I
Um,
think I have some of their beads. Isn't that
yeah, yeah, I think that, yeah, that's it.
That's
That's
cool.
that's crew of Orpheus. Um, and their theme this year was music of the spheres.
okay? Wow.
Um, so of course there was references to celestial bodies, and they pulled a lot of some of the stuff from like Holst the Planets, if you've ever heard that whole symphony of the planets,
Hmm.
where he goes through uh Mars to Neptune, basically. Mars, bringer of war. And there was one of the last floats, and I was not prepared for this, was it was about good and evil. Okay. And on the front of the float was Baphomet, like this big orange Baphomet, doing the exact, the above, so below.
The Eliphas
Uh,
Levy version, yeah.
yeah, right. And in the back there was like an angel, like a goddess on the back. So there's a lot of like, just a ton of classical references. The crew of Hermes was like that too. I did not get to see really any of the floats for ours because we're so focused on getting on it. And then when you're on it, like you don't really know what's in front of you. You don't really know what's behind you. Um,
Was it like Egyptian though, the one you were on?
there was some Egyptian themes, but their theme was like Thoth goes festing. So we had like a comic. We had Superman at the front of ours. And I don't really know what some of the others were. So
Okay.
I'd kind of like to see what they do next year, but it'll be a different theme. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but each one, Hermes, Proteus, Endymion, all these different names that they have for these crews. They're all most of them are from some kind of mythology, some kind of classical or even Egyptian mythology. Um, when we did the show about that, there was a great book that Sergio found that we both have, that's about, like, it's called Mardi Gras as it was, and I think it was written sometime in the 40s. And it goes through, how this started, why. Just kind of like a brief refresher is that, and I kind of had to refresh myself on this, especially when looking at the crew of Proteus, which was that's the oldest one. They uh uh, how it started was, Mardi Gras, of course, it's a Catholic holiday, and there were Mardi Gras celebrations in the French Quarter for the longest time, and still are. Um, but and parades were probably a part of that. But what happened was that, as the city grew, and of course the United States gained possession of New Orleans, you had that kind of, the French Catholic part and French and Spanish Catholic part of New Orleans. But then you had overlaid on that the new Protestant immigration to New Orleans. And around the 1850s, and actually the Mardi Gras parades, the crews were actually started by Protestants, not Catholics. I think I'm correct in that, right? Sergio.
Yeah, yeah.
It was like a group of like these Protestant businessmen. They wanted to take some of the focus away from the French Quarter, but also in a way to bring the community together. So they started these crews as a means to do to this uh to celebrate this Mardi Gras. And basically it was a way to bring the Protestants and bring the Catholics together in the city. So kind of the older people that had been there since the French had settled it, and the new Protestant influence, new American influence there too. And now it's like this kind of, it's a real hybrid holiday of sorts. Like, I mean, you don't have to be Catholic to enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm glad you got to do that, dude. That's pretty special. You called it once in a lifetime.
Yeah, it's massive. I
But
mean, it's a massive thing.
you're gonna do it again next year? Yeah,
Thinking about it, I don't know if I'll ride, but
yeah.
I definitely, because I just like you guys. I mean, you guys, you have to see this, and especially you guys that appreciate this kind of like history of secret societies, because that's what they are.
Yeah.
They're secret societies. They're based, and I think, the original founders of I think of Comus were Freemasons originally. And so they based it a lot on Freemasonry.
Yeah, that's the
But
mystic in the mystic crew.
right. And their whole idea, um but it's like, but it's a secret they are secret societies, but they have like this one purpose. And their purpose is to put on these parades and celebrate Mardi Gras. So, I mean, I find that super interesting in and of itself.
But yeah, for anyone who
And
hasn't heard
there's
that, you can
different. You've
go
got
check out
like
that episode.
Thoth is male, is all guys. But there are male and female people. It can join. I think Orpheus was both sexes, but it just depends on what the rule of the crew is, basically.
There's no co-masonry in Thoth.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I just, I would love for you guys to be there and to see something to get that out of it. Because I think a lot of people, that they don't, some people there, they love it, they enjoy it. It's a part of their lives, but they might not understand some of the imagery and some of the things that are being conveyed. So, and some of the people on the crew might not understand that either, because like Thoth was founded in 1947. So, I mean, it's been over 70 years, you know.
And like they do the same types of things in like Memphis, right?
Mhm.
Like there are crews in Memphis as well.
Yeah, so
Up the Nile.
but yeah, I don't think it's anything like what the reason how this all started for us, for me and Sophia looking into this, was we went to Destin in the beginning of 2019, and him and I decided we're gonna go to Pensacola. And I was like, Pensacola's a cool little place, we'll check it out. Well, we didn't know that there was a Mardi Gras going on in Pensacola, and this was like January 5th. So really, it was a 12th night celebration. And the beginning of 12th night, that's the end of the Christmas season or Christmas tide. And then that officially kind of starts the Mardi Gras season rolling until you actually get to Mardi Gras. So I think Mobile, there's one in there. Uh, Anywhere there's like that French or Spanish influence, there's a Mardi Gras.
That's cool. Was it Downard? Was didn't he have some or his family? Someone around Downard was connected to the Memphis, like one of the committees or something like that, you know. Um,
I think they've got those mostly Egyptian themed crews in
mhm.
Memphis, so that probably fits in all that.
There's also the Veiled Prophet too in St.
Yeah.
Louis.
Which is at the same time the stuff is like spreading up the Mississippi, the crew system. So then, it's this way that uh a new crowd, not traditional celebrators, were able to celebrate Mardi Gras across the country, and just all those Protestant secret society networks kind of celebrating themselves as like the kind of the royalty of the time, and that carries over into the Veiled Prophet. But I think something that the thing that I was really interested in was the way that they were used for social control. Like the whole idea was that the traditional celebrations in the French Quarter and stuff were too anarchic, and that this would create like a spectacle that could be organized by the city and the police and stuff, and it was more became more of like a passive thing. And then the Veiled Prophet Parade was like right after the big railroad strike and the commune of St. Louis, so it was a way to like restore order and like symbolically the capitalist class kind of like uh paraded themselves around as hidden royalties. Kind of weird shit.
You did all the research too on the labor secret societies, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
like it's fucked up, man, when you think about how many, like when you were talking about the spread of the cruise system and these secret societies up the Mississippi. But when you
Yeah,
really look at the
right.
sort of landscape, right, at the turn of the century, or late 1800s and early 1900s,
Hmm.
there were a lot of fucking secret societies, man.
Yeah, yeah.
Like a lot. It's kind of like the fraternities, like like when I went to Transy up in Lexington, Kentucky, Transylvania University, and like if you went to the college, 95% of the student body was in a fraternity or sorority. Like you had to, in a sense, join that system in order to function at the school.
I
And I thought
believe
that
it.
was really strange, but it was all of those fraternities and sororities were like 200 plus years old. Transy was in like the late 1700s that it was founded, so it was one of the earliest colleges. And like that was a weird thing to see, because I was like, why do you have to be a part of this? But it's like uh, most people were probably in some type of secret society or fraternal organization
Hmm.
at the end of the 18, if you were male, probably, right, in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Well, that's
Yeah.
like
Yeah, the Grange too, and
yeah, well,
everything.
yeah, I mean that's what the Spence, I think he talked about it. I don't know if you watched his History of Secret Societies on I think Wondrium is what it's on, but he talks about that. He talks about like the Knights of Labor is the most obvious one. I
And
mean,
they
that
had
was
to adopt
yeah,
that secretive
right,
system because
right.
without that, there would be we wouldn't have had the first unions because they depended on
Yeah.
that secrecy.
Right. It was an easy way to translate for guys that, it was a counter to, but it was also something that these guys would have been used to, something like Freemasonry already. So it was something that they were familiar with. To just to kind of talk a little bit about the, I was struck by, and I knew this going in, but like, really when you get there, you're really struck by it in the history of just the equation of the Mississippi to the Nile. Um, that's something that's very strong there, and like so you've got some of these, there's place names that are like, there's place like Araby and like these type of places or something like the Barbary Coast or um, and the Crescent, New Orleans is the Crescent City. Okay, so you've got a little bit of the Arabian stuff
Mhm.
going on. I mean, all this stuff was popular in literature in the 19th century. But like, and the Delta is the most obvious thing, I mean, but when we went to the Battle of New Orleans site, and I was telling you guys this, but like there were all these ibises there. And I kind of pointed out, synchronicity. Thoth is, the Ibis-headed god. But it's like it would be very easy for someone to be like that have these kind of romantic notions of
Yeah,
Egypt to
yeah,
see birds like that and say, well, the Mississippi is the new Nile. It's the
yeah.
backbone of the country. And it's like, I mean, it has the same strategic importance too. And then you've got, of course, Memphis, is pretty obvious. And then you've got Southern Illinois, Cairo, and that's called Little Egypt and all these type of things. So, I mean, some of that, even you could say that you could really say, like somebody like Downer, that would really, influence him and
Yeah.
like all these different kind of place names, whether he correctly understood it, I don't know. But it was kind of like you can definitely see there's just like that kind of fascination of like this is the new Egypt, this is the new Nile,
Hmm.
and these type of things, and just like kind of that it's that 19th century um
Orientalism.
Orientalism and Romanticism too, and it's translated into the place names and the ideas of the area.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
it's there. There's a lot there, just this transplanting of mystical narrative onto America that's been going on since the beginning. But yeah, that's pretty wild, dude, to see that. And I recall seeing white ibises in Florida at Disney World and kind of thinking the same thing. Were they
Yeah,
white?
yeah, they were white, and there were a whole bunch of them.
So I believe white and red are the colors of,
Yeah.
of the species that are in the Western Hemisphere here.
Right. And so, their relatives in Africa are around the Nile in Egypt. Obviously that's where they get the god from,
Yeah, I
or
mean, if
the
you're
image
not
of the god.
literally placing uh, biblical and mythological events that are supposed to be in the Near East here, which we know like Mormons do and uh, contemporary African American movements do. So it's like, some people literally think that this is Egypt.
Yeah. 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 So
all right,
that was my Mardi Gras experience.
that's
All
cool.
right.
All right, I've got a segue. I've got a segue.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
It's well, it goes with the Mississippi thing. I was just talking about like the
Right.
whole
Hell yeah.
Egyptian aspect of it, but you think about various mythologies overlaid on that, and I was telling you guys previously about the like looking into the Welsh, the Prince Madoc story,
Yeah.
right? That somehow, pre-Columbus, the Welsh had made their way into Mobile and that Mobile Bay and came inland to the Mississippi River, also hit that, and then travel up the Mississippi. But the weird thing is the stuff that I was finding, and there's all kinds of like stories of um, people encountering Native American tribes or French, fur traders, people that were really out in the wilderness encountering, Native American tribes that actually understood or spoke Welsh dialects, right?
Yeah.
There are tons of stories like that collected
Or
by some of
looked
these people.
European.
Yeah, or looked European, right? Yeah,
Yeah. The
exactly.
Mandan, I think, are often cited
Yes.
as being possible descendants of the
Yep.
Madoc stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, the Mandan tribe. But the story itself seems to have been possibly right, created by John Dee, and the Queen was trying to lay claim, and if they could establish that the Welsh were there,
Hmm.
early on,
Right.
and but the story though ends up getting mixed with King Arthur, right? And this idea that Prince Madoc is actually King Arthur was Welsh, right? There's some of these crazy researchers, right, in the UK, and one of the theories they put out this book. I can't remember the guy's name right now, but that basically uh, Prince Madoc was King Arthur's brother. King Arthur dies, and they have to flee. And so the Avalon, right, that they end up at is the New World. And they
Yep.
bring one of the
Hmm.
stories is that they bring King Arthur's body and the Holy Grail, which obviously the Holy Grail is just an invented romantic device, right? But um,
Maybe.
but maybe right, right. Yeah. But whatever it embodies. But the story is that they brought it over here, and one of the stories, King Arthur's still alive, and he ends up dying in battle in the New World. But the other story is that they bring his remains. In one of the stories, they bring his head. Right, it's like the head of King Arthur, which kind of blends in with the idea of the Welsh head cults, right?
Yeah. Well, there's
And
like the Braun the Blessed was
yes,
said to have died, and that his head was preserved, and I guess his head would talk to people and these type
Wait,
of things.
wait, though. I've got one question, Nathan. Does he end up, and does the Holy Grail end up in Somerset, fucking Kentucky?
not quite, man, not quite, but really close. Okay,
Okay,
really
okay, that's good
close,
enough.
right? But there are these stories that they came inland, right, and and ended up in a village called Talega, which means stranger to in the local sort of dialect. Anyway, one of the things like I have found some of the stuff in a as a fucking joke, right? I was like, it'd be funny to kick off season 3 of Pennyroyal with this ridiculous story that King Arthur ended up in Kentucky, right? If there was a King Arthur and it's tied, right? And I really was like, this will be kind of funny. And then the deeper I got into it, the more shit I found from people that actually legitimately believe that. And there are a ton of like like research at Berea College that that I was able to inspect, right? And look at and some of it's online and it's from this particular professor, but it ties all the stuff together and the whole Prince Madoc story. And like they end up in the fucking Daniel Boone National Forest, right? Right where, if you look at the books that these guys trace this, they actually come inland, right? This is spoiler alert too. I really break it out in season
Okay,
3, right?
cool.
But they come up the Mississippi, hit the Kentucky River, then to the Cumberland River, and end up coming to a place called Buck Creek, and that's where they go inland north to Berea. And there's a place there called the Pinnacles, and there's all kinds of weird shit that's been found there. Supposedly a suit of Welsh armor was found there also.
Really?
And if you look and so I was doing separate research on these mounds in Kentucky, and there are 6 mounds in Pulaski County, and there are 4 on Buck Creek and 2 on Pittman. Pittman is where Dan Dutton's farm is located on Highway 39, right?
Which we've
And
been to, yeah.
which you've been to. So right there across from Dan's farm, this is where one of the mounds is supposedly located on this other farm over there. But as you Buck Creek hits Pittman Creek, so where Buck Creek is, there are these stone graves, and they're mounds, and they're made from rounded stones. And so Funkhauser, some of these early archaeologists in Kentucky, refer to them as the stone grave people because they were completely different than the other burial mounds that were Adena or Hopewell, right? Like Mississippian culture.
Hmm.
And so, but the other culture that does this stone grave burial is the Welsh, right? And so I was looking at that, and where those mounds are located is right where Buck Creek hits the Cumberland, where these other researchers believe that the Welsh explorers went inland. And if you go north the way they go to Berea, it's the fucking Mount Victory Mine, like where all this weird stuff has happened, where the center of the Kentucky anomaly, all that stuff, when you map that all down, that's exactly where I pull up this map. That's exactly where these people are saying that this happened, right? And I'm like, that's weird, right? That's a weird layering on top of everything else of someone that doesn't know anything about any of the research. I mean, this is back in the 80s that they were pushing some of these theories and actually naming Buck Creek and Cumberland River and pinpointing this to a town on the other side of the Daniel Boone National Forest. And that was supposedly the last resting place of the Holy Grail, is what that's what they argue,
Well,
right?
All
sounds
right,
like you got
Nathan,
a
that's
treasure
it.
hunt waiting for you there.
That's it. We're going up there to find the Holy Grail.
I've always wanted to.
Remember, don't drink the one that's ornate. You got to drink the one
Right.
that looks like the cup of a first century
I was
carpenter.
looking for Jesse James treasure, but I think
Well, Jesse
that might
James might
top it.
be.
It might have to put that on hold for the Holy Grail. Although
How do you
That
know
whole
that Jesse James didn't go up there, find the Holy Grail, took it to
to
Nashville?
help the
Well,
Confederacy win.
hey man, he was in the fucking night the KGC, right?
Uh,
You know?
it's interesting.
Confederate Ananurbe.
It's interesting you mentioned that because back in September with the Paramania guys, we were in New England and we went to New Hampshire. We went to America's Stonehenge. And I don't quite know what to make of America's Stonehenge. It's an interesting place. Um, but it's like it's one of those places where you kind of like, this is a little dubious and a little weird. Like, is this, it's one of those kind of pseudo archaeological things, but they're pretty serious about it. And I think they trace some of that to the Welsh stuff and Henry Sinclair, which I think some of that stuff is entirely possible. I don't, I'm not one of these people that's like, Columbus, you actually absolutely has to be Columbus. And to kind of go back to what you're talking about with King Arthur and Avalon, I mean, a lot of people have speculated about that because Avalon is supposedly this island that lies off to the west. And, so how do we know that some of the information from the Vikings, which we know were there, in Newfoundland, or maybe even a little further south, how do we know some of that did not get, was not passed down, especially with all the
Yeah.
Viking influence in England?
Or
Yeah.
someone else, the Phoenicians
Yeah,
or who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah.
Egyptians. I mean,
I
right.
mean, I still think that there's something to the whole story that they found that cache of Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon and the Smithsonian took it, right? I love that story.
Well,
yeah, that's a good
I'm
one.
gonna let Sir Phil tackle that one.
Yeah, no. I mean,
But that's all
hey,
bullshit, right?
I mean, I wasn't there, so yeah.
Well, it's all about treasure hunting, man. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's all
Yeah.
about
Speaking of,
all
man,
about the journey, not
you
the
you touched
destination.
briefly on your grandfather, and if you don't want to go into it, feel free, but you said that he was a treasure hunter. What kind of treasure was he after?
So the this Jonathan Swift silver mines. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that story when you were living down in Tennessee. So there were stories that back in the, I think this is late 1700s, early 1800s, but like pre-Civil War, there was a character like a pioneer, backwoods dude that had found uh, a Native American sort of silver mine where they were getting some silver. He ends up sort of taking it, mining all the silver, and uh, and so it ended up being Jonathan Swift's silver mines. I don't know if he actually existed or not. He's one of those like mysterious characters
Yeah.
that could have been a cognate for somebody else, right?
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people that have searched for his gold. He had a journal. There's a lot of other like elements to it, but the big thing is that everybody was looking for. They pinpoint it in the myth, and if you just Google Jonathan Swift silver mines or Jonathan Swift silver, you'll find tons of articles online. Right? It's like an old American legend, and they pinpoint the location of the silver mine to Jillico, right? And there are two Jillicos in the area where he could have hid the gold, where he was operating in sort of eastern Appalachia. And one of the Jillicos is in Tennessee, just as you're about to like, not where the Smokies are, but it's like pretty far
Yeah.
south of us, right? And then there's a Jellicoe in Magoffin County where I grew up, and there it's like this crazy area with all these caves. They have a tea kettle rock, like it's just there are a lot of like weird structures and weird rock structures, and the Army Corps of Engineer ended up flooding it to make a lake. And prior to that, so that's what my mother's father was. It was pretty bad, like alcoholic who didn't like couldn't hold a job. You know what I mean? Like was always off, sort of drunk, looking for this treasure, and would come home late into the night and would be rambling and rambling
Yeah.
about these crazy treasures and finding these things.
That's
Um,
wild, dude.
and he looked all over Jellicoe. So my parents always told me about that. He died like way before I,
Mhm.
as an alcoholic died. But I always heard these stories, and my mom was always afraid that like I would end up like him and be chasing after like weird shit and
Yeah.
rambling about crazy stuff, which I ended up doing. Right? So
Well, yeah, yeah.
some of that's probably genetic, but I've always loved that story though, and I would,
Yeah, yeah.
I
Face the mystery.
romanticized it. She doesn't have good memories of it because it
Right.
was like her father was a crazy alcoholic looking for treasure. But, as an adult, I've sort of looked at it and thought, man, that's crazy. I've even tried to find, like, tried to go back and see if I could find documentation and places that he went to, but no one's ever found it. There are tons of treasure articles about this, but it's either in Jellicoe, Tennessee, or Jellicoe, Magoffin County.
Cool.
So yeah, it's really crazy.
Well, treasure hunting's in your blood.
Yeah, man.
The Eternal Quest.
The Eternal Quest.
Let's talk a little about what you got going on, Nathan. You sent me this to say we talk about the Hidden in the Herd podcast, and we talk a little about Spinny Roll season 3.
Which
Uh,
anyone who was at Strange Realities last year probably got
yep,
a pretty good preview of some of this research he's doing.
yes, they did. And you talking about associated with the Hidden in the Herd and the cattle mutilation stuff. You said the Tale of Two Flickingers. So what are we dealing with here?
Dude, I think that's one of the like the Hidden in the Herd story in that research. It's 6 episodes. It's a lot shorter than Pennyroyal, but 6 30 to 40 minute episodes should
When's
be
it
coming
coming
out
out?
like late summer.
Okay,
Hopefully we'll have Pennyroyal out in the next month or two, and then I've been sort of doing both parallel to each other. So like while I was finishing
gotcha.
up production on Pennyroyal, I was interviewing people for the Hidden in the Herd, and that's all just. I mean, it's so much of it overlaps with Pennyroyal, right? Guest wise and just research sort of went that way. But Yeah, you're gonna love how it all ties together. It is really cool, and it involves folklore and these ideas of like ostension and stuff. But and Nazis, right? We're always finding Nazis,
Always.
fucking
It's like
Nazis.
Indiana Jones. They
Yeah,
always pop up.
it's the Nazis keep popping up. But the one of the craziest fucking things, man, that popped out of the research was, and it's like a footnote in the story and the history of the cattle mutilation panic. But they hired this guy. There was a man in a prisoner that I think it was the Marion State or Marion Prison. It's like the second supermax prison outside of it. There's Alcatraz and then this other prison. And this guy, this prisoner, was writing all these letters to powerful people, senators, and supposedly he was listening to what the other inmates were saying and like jotting down their plots, right? And then reaching out to the authorities saying, if you'll get me out of here, I've got information on this or that, right? And so this all coincided with the cattle mutilation panic. And so he writes to I think this Minnesota senator and says, I know who's behind the cattle mutilations. It's this satanic nationwide satanic cult, right? Called the Sons of Satan. I've got information. I can tell you what they're doing, and I know someone who was in it, and they're going to start sacrificing humans, right? And they're going to assassinate all of these politicians. So the senator uh, ends up talking to Jerome Clark. He knew Jerome Clark, right? And knew that Jerome Clark was working with J. Allen Hynek on the UFO stuff. And so he gives him the letters and says, we want to look into this to see if there is any, if it isn't UFOs, that it is this satanic cult, right? So Hynek had an ATF agent that was his sort of like lead investigator, and his name was Special Agent uh, Donald E. Flickinger. Okay. And
Mhm.
this dude worked for NICAP and worked for the Center for UFO Studies. And he would go out and interview people, but his day job was working for the Treasury Department, and which the ATF at the time was still under the Treasury Department.
Okay.
And they they task him and Jerome Clark and this other guy, right? And I don't want to reveal all the stuff,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but they have this other guy with them, and they describe him as he was a paratrooper with the military. And so they like go to interview this prisoner about this. And so it's Jerome Clark, UFO investigator, this ATF agent, Flickinger, and this other guy who's a former special forces paramilitary guy, or a paratrooper guy. And I read that and I was like, well, that's kind of weird. Why would they allow that guy to go with him to interrogate, literally interrogate this prisoner, right? And anyway, this guy tells them that he has evidence that this cult, which is aligned with white supremacy, okay, and with like some Nazi shit and biker gangs, has been casing nuclear missile silos and is going to steal a nuclear warhead and has already stolen nuclear material and is going to set it off in America, and that they've been sacrificing those people. So it was enough credible information that for the next like 6 or 7 months, Flickinger and this ex-military guy are like Mulder and Scully, and they start traveling around the country following all the leads that this guy is giving them about these occult murders and magical rituals. And so I've been getting all these documents together and basically put together a history of who Donald, E. Flickinger was. But while I was researching it, I kept running into another Donald Flickinger, who is a major part of UFO lore, and he is Donald D. Flickinger, and he is a Navy admiral who pioneered the U-2 space program and was one of the first people stationed at Groom Lake, which eventually became Area 51. And later in life, he becomes Kit Green's mentor and provides Kit Green with information about the autopsy of aliens at Area 51, right? And his name is Donald D. Flickinger. So, like, these two Donald Flickingers, which is a really unique name, right?
It doesn't seem like it's super common. Yeah.
Right.
Right, are both involved in this. So anyway, I've put together, it's basically it's going to be season 2 of Hidden in the Herd, is a tale of two Flickingers, and it takes the story even further. But I was like, man, this is like X-Files shit, or like True Detective, that these two guys are running around. And the kicker was the ex-military guy that was with him turns out to be a fucking CIA agent who was with Operation 40 and the anti-Castro shit. And like, that guy has a gigantic file, like wrote a book, said the government was trying to kill him. And like, there he was running around the country with an ATF agent chasing down a satanic biker cult trying to steal nuclear weapons. Right. Isn't that amazing?
Sounds like a cool movie. It's, I guess it's at least somewhat real life. It's crazy, dude.
But they end up finding nothing. Right. That's the thing, right? Like, that's why it's a footnote, right? It's a footnote in the story of the cattle mutilations, because it's like,
Right.
Yeah.
they didn't find anything. But it's like, when you pull the documents, you're like, but why were they allowed to do this for so long, and like chasing down murders in Wisconsin and traveling to all these different states? Because the FBI would not actually investigate cattle mutilations. Like, there is an official FBI cattle mutilation report, but it centers on the red tape of not being able to investigate cattle mutilations because they don't deem it interstate, right? So they can't be called in. The only 15 actual cattle mutilations that they look at are on Native American reservations. And there's a great research paper written by a Native American scholar about this, and the fact that the FBI became the invading aliens on these reservations looking for cattle mutilations that the Native Americans did not. You know what I'm saying? It was like it was an excuse because the some of the Native American reservations were anti-U.S. government, and this was when there was like a bunch of protests against the government.
The
So the
American
Especially
Indian
after,
movement and stuff.
yeah,
yeah,
Wounded Knee. Yeah.
yeah, exactly right. So the FBI used the cattle mutilation thing to gain access, and they weren't investigating cattle mutilations; they were investigating the tribes themselves for anti-U.S. activities. Yeah. Anyway,
Wow.
fucked up.
That's
Just
awesome.
use
No, that's how
use
these
them
things
as
go. Can you, for anyone who wasn't able to see your presentation or isn't hasn't been following your stuff or your Patreon recently, can you kind of give a brief summary of Hidden in the Herd, this upcoming podcast, and what it's about?
Yeah, totally. So basically, I started looking at the cattle mutilation stuff, and I wondered if it was like alchemical because of the blood being missing, right, from the bodies, and like a lot of it centered on what's called the mineral triangle of Colorado. And so it's like, here's this place where most of these sort of alchemical minerals are being taken out of the earth. And there are all these, dead cows with their blood missing. So I thought, man, could this be alchemical? And when I really got into it, though, I quickly found out that like most of the stories were bullshit, right? And I wrote a FOIA request to like 21 states and all these agencies and got tons of documents. I have like uh video, like actual body cam footage of investigations of cattle mutilations in the last few years, right? New Mexico had those, and like um the biggest one was Colorado, and like in the mid 70s, that was supposedly the largest investigation that the Colorado Bureau of Investigation ever carried out. And so like I wrote them, and they initially told me they didn't have any documents, and I'm like, I sent the newspaper articles to them. I said, hey, for sure, like you have documents because it says this is the biggest investigation up through the 1970s. So they spend the next few weeks and they find the box, but no one's ever requested the box or looked at the box since 1976 or whenever it was, right? So they charged me a fortune to redact the documents because they were like, if you're going to be the first one that gets these, you have to pay the redaction fees. So I had to pay $800, right, to get these documents, you know, redacted, and they send them to me. And mind you, everything in all the newspapers and everything there, all these people were saying, all the officials, was 10,000 cattle mutilations, right? And I get the box, and it's like 300 pages, and it's like nothing's there, right? And it's obvious that they did not do any of the stuff that they said, and didn't take it seriously. It was just a political thing. And like I start digging deeper into it, and I also find just this crazy story of a guy named Dane Edwards who was with this small newspaper called the Brush Banner. And he was really the guy on the ground that was writing all these stories. And when he would write a story, it would get picked up by, 4,000 newspapers across the US, right? About the cattle mutilations. And then he's telling everyone he's getting really close to solving it. He knows what's going on. And then he fucking vanishes. Right. And I thought, my God, this is the greatest story ever. And later I find out he resurfaces, a few years later with another family. And like when he was at the Brush Banner, he was on his second family, and he was a con man, like a grifter. And like most of the stories about cattle mutilation and the number 10,000 came from this guy.
He's the
And
source for all that.
yeah, and so like then I start, you start questioning all this stuff, and you start looking deeper. And I didn't realize that the time that the cattle mutilation panic happened was like the worst time in the cattle industry, right, in history. And it cost more to bring a cow to market than it did to kill it, right? At one point, because the feed prices were super high. Grain, we were sending grain to Africa. There was a lot of starvation happening. So like grain was going to Africa. It wasn't going to these ranches. This was exactly the time too that the federal government decided, the Bureau of Land Management decided to take away public grazing rights, and so all these ranches that had five, 1 million head of cattle suddenly had to only graze on their land. And I didn't know any of this stuff. I found an article about the Sagebrush Rebellion that a professor named Michael Goldman had written. And he kind of floated this idea that maybe because during the Sagebrush Rebellion, these anti-U.S. government groups, and they were really sort of aligned with like the John Birch Society and a lot of like militia movements, they were trying to radicalize ranchers against the federal government during this whole Sagebrush Rebellion thing. And he kind of just mentioned like it's kind of odd that these cattle started showing up dead, during this time period. And so I just got deeper into that research and found a lot of stuff about psychological warfare. A lot of the Edward Lansdale that faked the vampire killings in
Right.
and the
Right.
Korean War. He's training the Vietnam soldiers how to stage these things, and most
Yeah,
of
he
them.
was a lot of his stuff was a precursor to Phoenix, the Phoenix program.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, these guys are coming back from Vietnam. They're not being welcomed with open arms back into society, but these paramilitary groups, militias are getting them, and you start to see this. Oh, and the biggest thing too is the black helicopters, right? People weren't associating cattle mutilations with UFOs. They were associating them with black helicopters,
Mhm.
and specifically the whole black helicopter mythos started in 1967 with the John Birch Society. They had published articles in American Opinion, their publication, that said that the UN was invading America using these black helicopters,
Mhm.
right? And the craziest thing that I started looking into was that were there actual silent black helicopters?
Right, right.
And you've actually find out that Howard Hughes was given a contract by the Department of Defense to create basically a completely silent black helicopter. It was called a black helicopter. It's I pulled up the name of here. I can't remember, but it's the Hughes 500. It was called the Quiet One, and it was used in Vietnam. It was called the OH-6A Loach, which is abbreviation for Light Observation Helicopter. And supposedly this helicopter could fly within 200 feet of a target before you started to hear sound. And it still is considered the most advanced stealth helicopter, that size. No one's ever been able to improve on it. But see, Hughes was one of the largest landowners in Montana during this time, right? And his wife was this huge, I think it was his second wife or third wife, had all these heads of cattle, and I'd floated that idea. Well, then Adam Gorightly sent me some research that he had uh, gotten from David Perkins, because Perkins had filed a FOIA request about helicopter fly incursions on U.S. bases. It was like he knew if he said, "Did you have any UFO sightings?" he'd get nothing, right? But he apparently filed a FOIA request for any type of illegal helicopter incursions at U.S. bases, and there was one, and they produced these documents, and they caught it was like a black helicopter, and it turned out to be an unmarked Hughes helicopter. It tied back to the Howard Hughes Company, and so anyway, that's the hidden herd has become sort of is that story of this other narrative, sort of alternative narrative and theory about what actually was going on. That there was a lot of militia movements, anti-U.S. government, anti-federal government groups that knew how to stage, a cattle mutilation to try to radicalize people to overthrow the U.S. government. And the John Birch Society is thrown in there. I've got all kinds of documents about that. And it's just a bigger story about,
Yeah.
white supremacy. Um, yeah,
And
it,
then
it
it creates like you it creates a lot of the first satanic
Yeah.
cult murder scares, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of also responsible partially for some of the satanic panic ideation that happened.
Yeah, and honestly, like the groups that were like, remember when the McMartin stuff happened, and Jessica remembers, like when that went down, the police officers were already receiving cult training, but not for that. It was for the cattle mutilation
Yeah.
stuff. They believed occult groups were mutilating these cattle, so they started having police officer conferences on how to identify occult elements in crimes. And like this is the precursor to McMartin, right? Like these guys were already primed to be like, oh yeah, well we've been looking for a cult since they've been slaughtering all these cows, right? And it just like fell into place. It's just weird, man. It's like a weird story. And like the craziest thing, as it always is with this stuff too, is I start trying to track down Michael Goldman that wrote the article about the Sagebrush Rebellion and look into that. And I'm like, boom, here he's teaching at fucking Somerset Community College here in the town I'm fucking in.
That's
Okay.
convenient. Did
So
you get to
so
hang out
that
with
was
him?
weird. He has yet to
Okay.
entertain me. Um,
Go knock on
we'll,
his door. Shit.
we'll see. We'll see if I can pull that off. But he's a major part of the story. But one of the other crazy two the things I want to mention is that one of these militia movements, this guy named Depew, he was an actual animal veterinarian and had a biolab company that developed like animal drugs, and he formed the I think it was the Montana Minutemen, right? And he wanted to do a domestic terror attack on people in America, uh, and he was going to use nicotine sulfate. Right? He said it was the perfect drug to attack people with. And when I got the forensic, like the autopsy stuff from Colorado, and then other researchers too have mentioned this, they started finding in these cows that were mutilated nicotine sulfate. So here's this, right wing militia guy who's taking on all of these trained, ex-Vietnam soldiers that know about psychological warfare. He's talking about psychological warfare, and he's stockpiling large amounts of nicotine sulfate, and that nicotine sulfate ends up in these cattle that it would be used to knock them out and then to stage the mutilation. And like that was a common chemical that was found over and over again in the cattle that were mutilated. So
Do you get the feeling from listening to this and what you're saying? As I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, the whole idea of strategy of tension. Do you get the feeling that in the 70s and in the 80s we were going through something like that? We're probably really going through it now.
Yeah, it's definitely
But
happening
but
now.
but 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 I feel like, I mean, I read, McGowan's book. What was it? Program to Kill.
mhm.
There's not a lot of stock I put in that book, but I think some of his basic thesis may be correct. He was probably just overlooking some things, or he got too caught up in the satanic panic mythos. But you feel like there is that kind of like this, that there was this broad-based kind of psychological warfare that was going on, and that it was, it was being used. I mean, you could really make a case that, it was being used to push a real kind of more conservative agenda.
Oh, for sure, man. And then, like, if you read Bill Ellis, folklorist Bill Ellis, and he really is kind of like got me started on some of this stuff too, because he writes about ostension. And like when I was looking at a lot of the local pennyroyal lore about the murders and how the murders were like different murders that had come together, uh, a mixture of stories, and then it
Yeah.
generated this story of a cult, right? So that's called ostension, and it's like the folklore itself isn't true, right? Like it never happened. Like someone might say, well, there's a cult in town. Well, then these high school kids go out right? And they spray paint occult symbols and act like a cult, and then
Right.
it perpetuates.
Right.
So that in
Right.
and of itself is ostension, right? And that's how a lot of these things get started. And Bill Ellis wrote a lot about that, and he wrote this book about the devil. It's called Raising the Devil. It's an incredible book. It's a collection of his essays, and it tracks the movement of the satanic panic all the way back to the 1930s to the charismatic movement, the revival movement in England. And it was an anti folk magic movement. And it eventually became like all of the mega churches where they would strike the person in the head and say healed, right? All of that came from this. And so he tracks cattle mutilations, the charismatic movement, and then gets into the McMartin stuff. And it's like all of these things come together at this one moment when basically Christian nationalism
Yep.
emerged, and
Yep.
Reagan takes over, and he's like, hey, Christian nationalists, like, I'm your man.
Yep.
And so, like, he shows how that happens. And I'm telling you, man, it's one of the most incredible books. And I didn't know anything about the history of charismatics, but like, that's a major influence. And it's like a major influence on parts of our lives that we don't even realize. Like we've
Yeah.
taken for granted that things are the way they are because of some pretty esoteric shit that happened a long time ago that no one's ever going to teach you about in history class, right? But it really did happen. And yeah, man, it's just it's crazy. But yeah, I definitely think that there is. I don't know if there was a nationwide like orchestrated psychological warfare thing, but I do think psychological warfare was like in vogue at that time, and different groups knew how to
Right.
enact it and use it, and I think it was coming from various angles, right?
Well, I mean, the media in the 80s really picked up on it just big time, and it magnified the effect exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can remember. I mean, I was a kid, but I remember that. I mean, I remember being told in Halloween, about razors in your apples and all those Satanists are going to chase you through the woods, and I remember all these things, and
Well,
it was just something that just got embedded into your psyche.
the media is essential to the entire concept of
Yeah,
strategy of tension, right? And that
right.
that comes from Italy, right? More than anything.
Yeah, it was during the years of lead. This is
Yeah.
yeah,
the idea that this is the idea that you're just constantly keeping the populace just on their toes. You're
Through
not giving them a
actions that
chance
get,
to
yeah,
rest. Yeah,
which
right.
would have just been like TV and newspapers at that time, but yeah.
Yeah,
th-
yeah.
think about this too, man. Like like you just like I grew up at the same time, right? And I remember I was my parents terrified me of like they're gonna snatch you. The Satanists are driving around in fucking vans.
Oh yeah.
They're poisoning
Oh.
the candy. But
Hmm.
like the crazy thing about the razor blades in the candy, right? Again, Bill Ellis talks about that in his book. He's got a whole essay about it because a kid ends up dead, right? In I think this was in Ohio, and the father, right, is like it was the candy. He ate a fucking razor blade
Yeah.
because these Satanists
Yep.
killed my kid. Well, later it turns out that the dad murdered his
So
son and used the story, the
yeah,
folklore of the Satanists and razor blades as a cover. But the news media
yeah,
picked up on it, man, and it became like common knowledge that that was a thing. But it wasn't. It was simply a cover that that guy used.
yeah. Nevaeh wrote about this on her channel on for Nevaeh's Nightmare. Just quick little plug there. The guy, he poisoned the
Yeah,
candy,
yeah, that's right.
and it was like that from that one case, like that magnified. But that was very much a part, and that was in the 70s.
Mhm.
But that was very much a part of the Satanic Panic. I mean, it was just all one and the same. Just that you had, it was, they talk about how, there's these memes about how, Gen X, we were like these free range kids, but we really weren't. Our parents were horrified by what they were seeing on national news that they thought the Satanists were going to come get us.
Yeah, yes.
you
Right.
know,
Or the UN. It was either the Satanists or the
or the
UN.
the New World Order was coming. But see,
Yeah, yeah,
we're back in that now because we're in a new satanic panic with
mhm,
QAnon. I mean, it's the same thing
yep,
basically.
yep.
I don't want to beat that to death because we did that in the last episode, but
I agree with you though. You're right. Yes, yeah.
um, so a couple another interesting thing there that you noted about the Hopkinsville Goblin case. You looking at that a little bit more.
Man, I highly urge everyone to go to the Center for UFO Studies website and deeply embedded in there. I'll send you the link, but uh, I don't think you can Google this and find this, but like as you dig deeper into their actual website, you will find their publications. And one of them is Isabel Davis's encounter at Kelly, right? And Close Encounter at Kelly. And I think she wrote it in 78, but she was an investigator with Hynek's Center for UFO Studies, and she went there in '56. So, like August the 20th, I think, or 21st, 1955 is when the Kelly Hopkinsville case happened in Kelly Station, Kentucky,
Yep.
which was just a few miles north of Hopkinsville, right? And everybody knows that story. I mean, that's where the concept of little green men, or the news media picked that up. Really strange case. The Sutton family ends up getting into a gunfight, with supposedly with these things. But I knew like the popular story, but when you read her, um, her book, which I forget the other guy that write, she has a co-writer with it. He does the introduction and the sort of the end of the book, the epilogue, and she went there 10 months after it happened and interviewed all these people and got all these documents, got documents from Project Blue Book, puts all this stuff together. And I didn't know any of this shit, right? Like, did you, and maybe you guys know this, right? Maybe you guys are familiar with this. I did not know that, uh, a state police officer. There were all these meteor sightings, right? Green. You remember Project Twinkle and the green meteors that the U.S. government was trying to track down because they were seeing all these crazy green meteors in the 40s and early 50s. Well, there are these before the Kelly Hopkinsville thing happened earlier that night. A state police officer and other witnesses saw these green meteors and actually heard the booms of them entering the atmosphere
Hmm.
a few miles south of the Kelly farm, which I thought was strange, that they had that this whole meteor thing was in it. And then the family, they were Pentecostals, and Miss, I think her name's Lankford. She's the actual wife of Tillman Sutton, and so you've got Lucky Sutton was her son, and so like he and his wife, and then another couple have been working for the circus. So people have often said they were skeptical because they were circus performers, right? But they show up at
There were
this farm.
carnies.
They're carnies, man. They know how to
Yeah.
deceive people, you know.
Make
But
they know how to make a good story.
right? And so that's like one of the primary things that skeptics say. What I did not know was that they were Pentecostal holy rollers. And she states to Isabel Davis, or states in one of these interviews, that right when this happened, that they earlier that day they were at the Pentecostal church and they were in a religious fervor, like a trance, right? And on the way home, they were discussing a pamphlet that she had gotten from a religious service, like a clipping that she had asked to be sent to her. And it is a picture of these two men holding a little silver man that's the size of a monkey between them, right? And it's a famous hoax April the
I,
1st photo,
I
right?
know the picture you're talking
Right?
about.
Right?
Yeah, they're in uniform and they have the
Yes, yes,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. I know, yeah.
Yeah. So that was like 52, right? Or 51 or 52. So she had a copy of that sent to her by a Texas religious publisher who was touting that photo as something about, angels and devils and shit. And they were on their way home from this religious meeting where they got worked up, she said, into a religious fervor. And on the radio in the car on the way home, they heard one of these religious shows, church shows that was being broadcast, preachers bring up that photo. And she went home and dug the photo out. And then 2 hours later, they were besieged by these little silver men, right? And like,
Interesting.
I've never heard that before. But, and then, like, after all that shit happens, all the men leave and drive to Evansville, Indiana. And it's like, why did they in it for another like church meeting? And so I don't know, man. That definitely, there's a
Mhm.
lot of other stuff in that report. I just think that like if you have the chance, read the report. Like it is incredible, in like in the field investigative reporting on high strangeness, but there are so many details, and it's like one of the foundational seminal cases in ufology, right? And there's just tons of stuff that you've never heard, glowing spots in the grass, like all kinds of weird. Look, the meteor shit was weird. Obviously the Air Force showed up, and then, I've always wondered if there wasn't some connection because of the whole John Mulholland thing, the magician for the CIA. And he shows up in 55 too, right? Or 56, like the year after, and is tasked with looking at it. And it's like, was LSD going around at the time, and like MK Ultra started in 53 and this is 55,
Right.
right?
Right.
So it's, were they
Uh,
following?
but you had to wonder, but I'm surprised that actually kind of does surprise me because how much in circulation was that photograph?
I don't
Because
know.
I mean, I remember seeing it. I mean, I'm kind of looking for it because I think it's in Jerome Clark's book here. But
Mhm.
anyway, um, but also just the proximity to Fort Campbell.
Yes. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the thing too. It's like
Okay.
immediately there were there were four people, four
Yeah.
MPs from Fort Campbell showed up at the farm the night that it happened with all the
Right.
other police officers.
Right. I mean, you do wonder about that because Flatwoods Monster is around the same time,
Mhm.
and you could really make a case that Flatwoods Monster was some kind of um, psychological warfare device.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's
Well,
see what these yokels do,
uh,
and you could really base that on um, during World War II, there was a British psychological warfare officer that built these big scarecrows, and these things would they would emit like smoke, and they had glowing eyes, and they fit very well with the Flatwoods Monster. Like
yeah,
Nick Redfern's done a lot of work on that. But I
that's
wonder
fascinating.
about the Kelly Green Man and whether or not there was some psychological warfare aspect to it too.
And like 4 months earlier, uh, there was uh, another sighting in Ohio, and it was the original Loveland frog sighting happened
Yeah,
in 55, like in March.
right. Hmm.
And again, it happens in 72, but the original sighting was they saw meteors in the sky, a similar
Hmm.
sort of thing, and then saw these like little green, little
Mhm.
reptilian looking dudes, right? Um, the drawing also of the craft uh, that was seen by, I forget if it was Taylor or one of the guys that went out to get water at the Kelly farm or at the Sutton farm, saw this craft, and he describes it as egg shaped, right? And so like he draws it, and it's the exact drawing. It matches the exact drawing of the Lockland UFO that was sighted near where Loveland is, right? Which this is back in 1898. There's the famous Lockland, Ohio UFO, and it
Hmm.
is this egg-shaped thing. But like side by side, the drawings are almost identical, right?
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. I never heard that they. It's almost like they were psychologically primed
Mhm. Definitely, they
for
were the
that.
perfect people to target,
Yeah.
right?
Well, they're in the middle of nowhere. They're in this little farm,
They have a very
and
enchanted worldview.
yeah.
Oh,
So, if we were talking about like mass hysteria, I mean, that would have been a good thing, a good way to study that.
mhm. And if you look at her report too, we always hear the story that there was this shootout, right? And they had
Right.
these guns and they fired
Right.
200 shots. Well, the actual police report shows the window they shot through, and it's not bullet holes, and it's
Yeah.
not new. and like they only found two shells outside and one spent shell inside, but all were old. And so like, and then they interviewed neighbors, and the neighbors said they didn't hear any gunshots, right? And
It's
so it's
crazy.
like,
It's
you
crazy.
know, but she covers all that. Of course, she's like, no, I found someone else who said they did hear it. I can't account for those, where all the shells are, but it definitely, like, she basically is like, it definitely happened. And I'm like, I don't know, man. This all sounds pretty suspect. Like something happened, I think, for
Yeah.
Something
sure.
happened.
It's
Something
crazy
happened.
to think though
Yeah.
that there might have been this little window of time where all these like rogue agents were just dosing hillbillies across the
Yes,
country, dude.
dude.
What about the stuff we haven't heard about? Like the stories
Yeah.
people didn't want to tell because it would, ruin their reputation, or like how many people.
Well, we know from was I think the church committee
Mhm.
went through
Yeah.
all this. We know that in major cities they were dosing,
What
prostitutes
was it? Operation
and people.
Climax, where they were
Right. I
doing
mean,
that.
these things were going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Prostitutes in their johns. I mean, they were doing this. I mean, and that's documented. That's
Yeah.
not
So
fiction.
could a lot of this like
Yeah.
cryptid and UFO stuff be the rural side effects of the same well
Well,
documented MK Ultra experimentation on urban people?
that's what
That's,
I would. That's why I'm
Yeah.
saying. Like, let's see what the yokels do. I mean, it
yeah.
was basically it could have just been a way to study. If we do this, let's see what the result is, and let's see how we can apply this, in
Warfare.
Vietnam or
Oh,
wherever, whatever, I mean, I mean, the Wandering Soul, we mentioned the Phoenix program. I mean, that was straight out of, I mean, that was using religiosity and religious beliefs and supernatural beliefs against the population.
yeah. Yeah. Well, think about it too, like if you were going to do this type of warfare, like just think Cold War, right? If you were testing LSD on urban populations, which we know they did, right? We know that that was an actual thing. You would also, because
Yeah.
most of the population is in the non-urban, right? The rural areas, you'd also have to test it there. There would just be less likelihood that you would get caught.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
stereotypically, those are going to be people who are more religious, who are more superstitious, and maybe they, just got more space to see wild shit like this than if you're in a fucking high-rise building somewhere or in some prostitution den. Like
Well,
That's
I think all you would really have to do is dress up in some kind of either brightly colored or even black clothing, and you just start harassing these people, and then their imaginations will just fill in the rest.
yeah,
well.
while
You
they're
might not
So
even
treating
think
for
need to
sure.
use drugs or anything like that.
Well, think about this too. Like with the Hopkinsville encounter, she interviews all these people, and the police do too. They only saw, because we're always told it was an army of these creatures, right? They were all over
Right.
the house and crawling all over the house. But in the actual, like it's pointed out in this report that only one was ever seen at any one time, and there was
Right.
only one sighting for a brief moment that two were together.
Mm.
So like there
Yeah.
were actually never seen more than two things that looked
Yeah.
very puppet like, right?
Yeah.
And they dinged like metal and twisted upside down and twirled, right? And it's like that doesn't sound like fucking aliens. It sounds like a little robotic puppet thing or whatever. You know what I'm saying? But it's like someone's got something on a fucking stick outside their window, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I
I don't
mean,
know.
one pulled the hair, right? I mean, that could have
You know,
been
it
somebody.
just
That
it
could have
just
been
touched his
somebody
hair.
from. Yeah.
It just touched his hair.
Yeah.
They saw a tiny
Right.
claw touch his
Right.
hair. You know,
If you terrorize people enough,
there's a
their imaginations are just going to run
there's
rampant.
a there's a great like excerpt in the report too that she includes where it's like one of the women who a lot of them were like, I didn't see anything because I wouldn't allow myself to look at them, right? And so this one woman says, I only got one look, and I was laying asleep, and she's like, I rolled over, and it was like pressed its face against the window and slowly brought up a little claw and tapped the window. And like it just sounds so fucking ridiculous,
Yeah.
dude, you know?
The CIA's puppeteers. Where Jim Henson
But
got to start, man.
this is
Conspiracy.
the other thing too that I found, which I think this is a possible thing too. All right, check this out. The While I was doing the research on Flickinger, right, the Donald D. Flickinger, I'm looking at that and the Groom Lake U2 plane program, right? And dude, when they started the U2 flights, test flights in August 1955, and a bunch of them crashed. And they were top secret flights that crashed, and they had to stage shit to recover the craft. So what if they were flying a fucking U2 plane across the country in August, and it fucking crashed in Kelly fucking Hopkinsville, area outside of Hopkinsville. And like they actually staged this to cover up the recovery, because every single one of the uh like police, state police, everybody for a number of hours goes to this farm. And like they could have been doing that, and then over here we're
Mhm.
recovering a spy plane,
Well, and the more
right?
ridiculous you make it, then, anyone who does see anything to do with that other thing, they'll be like, "Oh, you must be looking for goblins, boy."
Exactly. And
Yeah,
and
because the U2 was not known about until Gary Powers crashed over the Soviet Union.
yes, yeah. And so like the guy that designed the suit that Gary Powers wore was Donald Flickinger. He was the pioneer of this like uh basically he built the astronaut spacesuits too. Like he pioneered all of that shit. And like Gary Powers was wearing his suit when he crashed, you know.
Interesting.
So what exactly was the Donald D. Flickinger's title?
He became an admiral, so it's Naval Admiral Dr. Donald D. Flickinger, and he was a specialist in air. I forget how they aero. He worked with NASA also, but he was one of the original, like when Groom Lake was established for the U2 program. He was there. Lockheed chose, like he was part of the group that was chosen by Lockheed to build that.
Does he
And
have CIA collaboration involving the U2
yes, yeah,
program?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. That whole thing too, if you dig into just the history, the legit history of Groom Lake, not any of the UFO stuff, just like because there's a lot of Donald D. Flickinger files. There's tons of stuff that's been released by the FBI, because of the declassified U2 program, and he's all over it. Right, there's just tons of documents. So it was one of the, I was looking at the Flickinger stuff, and then started looking at the Hopkinsville stuff for Pennyroyal, and then I just thought, I know this was 55. When did they crash those U2 planes? And then I look and it's like August, they were flying all these test flights that crashed. And it's like, boom, there's a fucking UFO encounter. You know what I mean? It's like, what if what that guy saw, right? They saw the meteors and heard the booms. What if that was the fucking U2 plane coming in and, penetrating the atmosphere from space and crashing,
Possible. I mean,
you
it's
know?
possible. I mean, they went so far up that they could see the entire continental United States. That was
Yeah.
the point of it,
Yeah.
you know. And you know who was just to tie it in, because why not? I mean, Kerry Thornley and Lee Harvey Oswald were both at Sugi Air Base where they were flying the U-2s out of 1959.
I didn't know that. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
yep. A lot about the
See,
U-2 tonight. So what's this so the time we got left here, what's this 11 Somerset? Is this some kind of weird synchronicity here?
dude, I was just recently down at the Magic Kingdom, down in Disney World with my kids, right? And I swear it was a wonderful trip. It's exhausting. Disney World's exhausting. I reread Bosley's Key to the Kingdom about Disneyland.
Yeah.
Obviously, we were going to Disney World in Florida, but I was down there and and it was cool, man. I love Disney World. There's a lot of strange stuff there, connections between SRI, right? The Stanford Research Institute and Disney, which is legit and true and weird, you know. But so I was there. We were leaving the Magic Kingdom, and I was sitting on this bus, and they have all this like stay magical branding, right? And I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
just in terms of like enchantment and a lot of the research that we've done
Mhm.
lately, and just sort of one of the themes of Pennyroyal about enchantment in your life, right? And I was like thinking about it, and I looked down at my phone, I checked my email, and I get this email at that moment from this email account that said, I won't say the whole thing, but the username was Reality Upgrade, and it was titled 11 Somerset, and it came from my public facing just contact form on Pennyroll's website. And so this person basically says that they've never listened to the podcast, but a friend of theirs at work or a coworker uh, had listened to it and said that they needed to send this in, that told this person to send me this information that I might find it useful. And basically that there was a Canadian television show called 11 Somerset about a group of kids in this strange town. And it involves trans-dimensional travel, all of these weird figures, cybernetics, investigating all this high strangeness and ghosts and this 11 Somerset, right? And that they created a video game that went along with it and an alternate reality game. And then the person goes on to say that they were researching 11 Somerset and found out that the same people that created that show created the TV show Galador, right? And if you know what Galador is, it's the Lego back in like the early 2000s was going like was losing money, which I'm like Lego was losing money, but they were apparently, and they wanted to branch out into making action figures, but they wanted it to be Lego themed so you could like take the body parts off, and they needed a storyline, a world to put these toys in. And they created Galador, Defenders of the Outer Dimension. And it had an alternate reality game about a boy who, uh, whose father was in the outer dimension and built a ship called the Egg that he used to travel between dimensions. And his name was Nick, right? So the people that created this, they like start looking at how their alternate reality game is going, and they find William Athene's Ong's Hat reality game, right? And the whole like liminal cycle, the Montauk stuff, right? And there's a lawsuit between Matheny and basically Galador and Lego over this. Lego even made a small Game Boy system that fit in the back of one of the toys, and it was called the Kek Powerizer. And like it's this crazy toy device thing. So that whole show involves the Ong's Hat stuff. So this guy's telling me that those people that made that made 11 Somerset, and now 11 Somerset doesn't exist anymore. It's lost media. There's no way to get it, and the game is gone. And
It's like some
and they
butterfly effect shit, huh?
it's weird, man, right? And so
Almost.
then they tell me about something called the manifold, and that all of this drove them mad, and they lost their grip on reality. But they wanted to pass this on to me that I might find the 11 Somerset information useful. I thought someone was fucking punking me, right? Because think, 111 and 11 and Aleph and all the stuff with the Freemasonry stuff, Lodge 111, Sammy Catron was Patrol 111. There are 11 figures heavily into, you know, the pennyroyal
Okay.
narrative and the folklore, right? And so I thought someone had made this up. And then I look it up, and sure enough, it really is a 2004 Canadian TV show, right? It really did exist. And on YouTube, there's a 13 episode walkthrough of the game, and it involves all kinds of shit that shows up in the pennyroyal episodes and story are in this game, in this TV show, right? And so I've been trying to get my hands on it. And then I went down the rabbit hole of this manifold thing, which is this weird art project that involves like transdimensional travel, cybernetics, all this weird stuff. So I don't know, man. It's been a weird thing. It was conceived also at the time that Sammy Catron was assassinated, right? Is when the show was conceived, right? In 2002. So I don't know, man. I said to my wife, I was like, what if there was some type of like ripple? You know, like this figure gets killed, and like you said, like a butterfly effect. You know, it's like somehow in the etheric matter, this crazy event happens, and then it's some guy in Canada's like, huh, I'm gonna write a show called 11 Somerset, right?
Glitch in the Matrix, bro.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Gonna
Anyway, isn't
dig
that
up
weird
a
though?
box with a VHS tape in it,
Right,
recorded from TV.
right.
Um,
If you
so
find that, let us know for sure.
I will.
yeah,
I
I'm
will.
surprised that would be 2004. I mean, I'm surprised it's lost.
There,
That's weird.
there's a rabbit hole, man, of this. Like, there are all these people online. There's a petition to try to get the show released. People have contacted the people that own it, the company that made it. They will not release the episodes. One of the episodes is in the Canadian National Archives. I contacted them, and yesterday they wrote me back and said that they could not release the episode to me because the original copyright owners would not allow it to be released, even though it's in the National Archive.
Can you go watch it there?
Yes, you can
Okay.
do that.
That's expensive to go
Yeah,
watch it.
dude, just to see it. It's only the fifth episode. They only have the fucking fifth episode, right?
That's crazy.
Really?
There's a Wikipedia page for this, and they have the outlines of each episode
Gotcha.
translated from French. So check it out, dude. It is really bizarre, and it's like that happened like 2 weeks ago, so or 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it's like, I'm trying to wrap up Penny Roll, but I keep getting all this like
Yeah.
extra shit that I'm like, man, I've got to stick that in there.
Yeah. Well,
See,
speaking of, what can we expect from Penny Royal 3, and when will that be hitting
Well,
the digital airwaves?
and what about the spear? I think that goes along with it.
oh yeah. So one of the so I'm shooting for trying to get the penny roll out at the end of March. I think it's going to be a little bit past that,
Mhm.
uh, just because I'm adding all this new stuff. But so yeah, so in the next couple months, keep an eye out. It'll be dropping. I'm going to drop it weekly. I'm not going to do the full drop all at once. So, um, there are 10 episodes, and yeah, I mean they're good. I'm just keep adding things, adding
Yeah.
stuff here, adding stuff here. I recently got to interview Josh Langfelder of that created the Randonautica app. That's sort of a part of the story. And I didn't think I was going to get to interview him, and it was like 2 weeks ago I got to. So like that's going to have, I'm trying to add that into it
Yeah.
as well.
Well, I'm
But
sure as in mixing music, you're never done. There's a point that you stop. So
I know, dude. I
I'm sure
know.
that's coming
I know.
soon.
Yeah. So at some point I'll have, but in the next couple months, because I want to get that out, and then later in the summer get Hen in the Herd out. But one of the things that has come out of this is that we've been a couple years ago. Darian had developed some randomness, like entropy detection software. And we talked about it in Penny Roll, the whole Princeton Pear Labs egg project, the Global Consciousness Project, that research that they did, where they had, I think at one time it's 45 at the height of the actual program. There were 65 different places around the planet that had these eggs, and there was an isotope inside the egg, and it was at random times would release a particle, and they were using this to generate true randomness, right? True entropy. And so they were tracking a baseline around the world of what the entropy was. And so they claim, and they put this out there as evidence, that 24 hours prior to 9/11 happening, all of these egg devices, the entropy around the planet dropped, right? And things became less random and more deterministic. And so other events, I forget, it's like 21 events or something that they've tracked that affected the whole world, have shown to have changed the entropy. And so, kind of based off of that, and this idea of magic and people imposing their will on reality, and this idea that people are stacking coincidences, stacking synchronicities to cause magical effects, right? And then people that are psychic, right, and knowing what's going to happen and acting on that, that all of those things would theoretically decrease the randomness, right? And you would see an decrease in entropy. And so a couple years ago, we developed some software that could get a local baseline of randomness. And then we were inviting people that purported to do magic or that were psychic, or having people play with Ouija boards, or taking this device to like graveyards, haunted houses, to see if, when someone encountered something strange or had a UFO sighting, or whatever, had made contact, channeled a being, if that would cause the randomness to drop. So we've encased that now in a mobile device, and there's a group of them, calling them spear sensors, right? And it's single position, entropy and randomness sensors. That's where the spear comes from. But do they actually stick into the ground? And so you
Right.
can go to a site or to a place. And one of the things that we're doing, they have GPS and a G3 communicator in there, and they use a Geiger counter. And the Geiger counter is actually what helps generate the randomness. And there's a 3-axis magnetometer, all that's built into the module. And so the plan is to place these around Pulaski County and around where the Kentucky anomaly is initially, to look at some of that stuff. But I want to take them to some places that are purported to be haunted, or go to the Mill Springs battlefield. We've got a haunted Civil War battlefield. And some of these places where people are encountering things, where strange things are happening. And then, when you put these things in the ground, it creates, because they have the GPS and the G3, sort of a mesh network, and it will give you the information through a mobile app that we've designed that syncs with these things, right? So yeah, so we're trying to test that out to see if there's anything there, but it's really based off of the Princeton pair research, basically.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to Penny Royal season 3 and Hidden in the Herd and anything else you got going on.
Thanks.
Um, Thanks a lot for coming on, man. It's always just picking up where we left off.
Yeah.
We hope to see you soon. Adam might see you a little sooner than me, probably, but yeah, hopefully sometime this year.
Yeah, man. I love you guys. I
Yeah,
always,
we
always
love
have
you,
the best
Nathan.
time with you guys.
We want to thank you. We want to thank you for coming on, and uh, we're looking forward to what you got going on. I'm definitely looking forward to Penny Roll season 3 and Hidden in the Herd. So
Thanks, man.
I want to thank you for coming and hanging out with us tonight. Guys, we are still going strong. We're going to be putting out some more shows here pretty soon. We do have our Patreon. We've actually got a couple of new
Yeah.
Patreon entries up, and one with Dr. Future and Robert Guffey, continuing that discussion. So if you guys haven't checked that out, definitely go check it out. Hopefully, sometime soon we will be getting back to doing our monthly meetups. Hopefully, and we'll keep you apprised of that. But if you want to support the show, we are here. We're more than happy to take your support. Surfiel can tell you where to find that.
Yeah, you can head over to patreon.com/conspiranormal. That last episode with Guffey and J. Michael Bennett, aka Dr. Future, is really
Doctor
great.
Future.
And if you're interested in B movies and the point at which the Bohemian Grove changed from that Bohemian hangout to a weird elite sanctuary, head on over to patreon.com/conspiranormal. Let's give Nathan a chance to say his contact and everything.
Yeah, so you can find Penny Royal on Spotify, all the major platforms, the website. We've got a Patreon, Liminal Lodge, where we talk about all this research. And yeah, so Hidden in the Herd, when that all is out on Spotify, I'll be sharing that as well. So.
Absolutely, Gus. Thanks for listening, and be back soon.